Have you ever wondered what life would be like during the Viking era? Well, it doesn't really matter. The good thing is that you weren't alive during that period because, honestly, you wouldn't have survived too long. And in this video, I'll tell you why, and then you'll be thankful you weren't born back then. So, let's get into it. Vikings are famous for their war brutality, but that isn't the only reason for their extinction. Surviving in Viking age wouldn't be easy for anyone. Many reasons made survival tough during the Viking Age, from food habits to unhygienic culture. The Vikings were a ruthless culture, still famous for their prowess and bravery in combat even after 1,000 years. From the recent archaeological studies, it is evident that life during the Viking Age was harsh, brutish, and short. Having said that, let's dig deep through the pages of history to understand why you wouldn't have survived during the Viking Age. Female infanticide. Vikings sacrificed infant girls to their pagan gods as part of their religious rituals. Moreover, because the Vikings were frequently away from home, there was a greater risk of adultery. The Vikings slaughtered so many infant girls that the gender balances were thrown off. As a result of this imbalance, European women were kidnapped and taken to Scandinavia during the Viking Age. According to a study, these were not random acts of savagery. Rather, it was a concerted effort to correct a self-inflicted gender imbalance. The young Vikings weren't merely driven by a desire for riches, but also a desire to improve their chances of finding women. Female infanticide was documented as a pagan Scandinavian practice, resulting in a significant drop in the men-to-women ratio. Primitive forms of medicine. The Vikings were known for their ruthlessness and fearlessness in battle, but they were also human and thus sustained injuries of different severity during the conflict. On the contrary, Viking medicine was extremely primitive. These interim cures were superseded by Viking battlefield medicine when the combat was done. These methods were of uncertain efficacy, mostly carried out by women, and none of these remedies had any scientific backing. The severity of the wound was decided by smelling the wound. Yes, you heard that right. Yeah, that was not all. Before smelling the wound, the injured soldier was given a stew made out of mushrooms, onion, and other wild herbs. Then their wounds were licked or tasted. And if the healer detected the stench of the soup from within, the wound was considered deadly. Then these soldiers were left to die and were not given any medical attention. Those who had better immunity survived. Tasting the blood directly from a wound to establish the nature of an injury was another equally heinous medical practice of these Vikings. Magic was also employed to heal wounds acquired during a battle. According to Viking legend, slaughtering a bull on a hill and then delivering its chopped meat to elves living in the mountains would speed up the healing process for the wounded. The lack of proper medicines resulted in the death of many innocent Vikings who could have lived a little longer. Knowing this, it is true that surviving during the Viking Age was next to impossible. Humiliating enemies with homosexual intercourse. In Viking society, homosexual rape was widespread, with vanquished enemies frequently becoming victims of sexual abuse as a show of dominance and shame. Homosexuality was not seen as fundamentally bad or deviant in Viking society. However, this does not rule out the possibility that the Vikings opposed gay behavior. A guy who sexually surrendered himself to another person of the same sex was seen as untrustworthy and unmanly, and believed he would be inclined to do so in every area of social conduct. Being exploited homosexuality by another man was also linked to the quality of cowardice. On the contrary, there was a long-standing tradition of using sexual violence on a defeated foe. As a form of dominance, enemy couples were seized and raped. This behavior was seen as a dishonor to the defeated enemy. sacrificing slaves along with their masters and also to please their pagan gods. Even though Viking slaves were capable of earning or purchasing their freedom, they were frequently sacrificed in honor of their dead masters. The noblemen, the freemen, and the slaves were the three main classes of Viking society. Children born to slaves were slaves from birth. Others became enslaved after being captured in a conflict or being unable to repay debts. The Viking economy depended heavily on the trade of kidnapped slaves. Slave treatment varied depending on the owner, but overall, circumstances were deplorable. They were not only assigned the toughest of labors and sexually exploited every day, but were also unwillingly or reluctantly sacrificed and buried with their slain lords. A festival was celebrated yearly where everyone came to honor the deity and then eat and drink. A person would sacrifice an animal and place the butchered animal on stakes erected at the entrance of his farmland. This was done to make it clear that he was sacrificing in the name of his god. While some gods just requested tangible belongings or money as a gift, others demanded a human sacrifice matching his stature among the gods. These Vikings were so mean that they killed innocent slaves to be buried with their masters or just to please their gods. Slaves were one of the most suffered classes in the Viking society. Getting high and killing people without discrimination between friend or foe. Berserkers were legendary Viking warriors who fought without armor and used their rage and fury as weapons. The word berserk comes from the Old Norse word berserk, which means bare-handed. The hallucinogenic mushrooms were the source of their fury. These mushrooms had a numbing and hallucinogenic effect on the body. It started with shivering, chattering teeth, and cold in the belly, followed by swelling of the face and great rage, which rendered their faces crimson. They howled like hungry wild beasts and hacked down everything they came across, making no distinction. As a result, they killed many innocent individuals without discriminating between friend and foe. When the situation returned to normal, the hallucinations faded and they experienced mental dullness and weakness that persisted over several days. Doesn't matter if you're their ally or the opponent. It wasn't possible to live longer during the Viking Age, as these Viking warriors would kill anyone without knowing who they were. Poor hygiene and food habits. The Viking civilization was filthy, lacking even the most basic hygiene standards, and the absence of disinfectants created an excellent breeding environment for parasites. Due to poor hygiene and eating raw meat, the Vikings became infected with various parasitic worms. The Vikings' ingestion of raw and tainted meat, particularly uncooked parts like the lungs and liver, contributed to the spread of these parasites. These parasitic inhabitants developed a slew of health issues for Vikings. They experienced impaired immune systems, liver damage, and even anemia. As a result of their unsanitary eating habits, Vikings had shorter lifetimes. Deadly and violent sports. Sports have always been an important part of human civilization, and the Vikings were no exception. Viking games and tournaments were notoriously brutal and hazardous, with high fatality rates. One such well-known game was a drowning competition that took place in the water. The object of this sport was to submerge the opponent for as long as possible. Gladiator games, similar to those played by the Romans, were fairly frequent, with two opponents fighting each other until one of them died. In Viking civilization, even wrestling was more savage. They wrestled on a wrestling field with a big flat stone placed in the middle that was used to break the back of their opponents. It wouldn't be wrong to say that these Vikings had an uncivilized, primitive culture. Another such game was throwing the bones of animals at each other after eating food. Historical records and archaeological studies prove that these brutal games were the cause of numerous deaths. This could be why we cannot find an ample number of Vikings around the world today. Blood Eagle. ruthless method of execution in human history. Last but not the least was Blood Eagle, which is considered to be the most ruthless method of execution in human history. With the incredibly harsh conditions of life in Viking society, it's probably unexpected that they're blamed for inventing the Blood Eagle execution method. It was the most gruesome and torturous means of death ever conceived by humans. The Blood Eagle was a ceremonial and sacrificial method of execution. The victim was laid down in front of his killer, who severed his ribs from his spine. Then, the victim's lungs were pulled out and draped over their shoulders to create the illusion of wings. Yeah, you heard that right. It was as terrible as it sounds. Only a wild beast could be capable of doing such a thing. Many accounts have been reported in Viking history of this. They would carve an eagle on the victim's back with a sword, cut the ribs from the backbone, and then pull the lungs. This is how the Vikings lived their life. Now, the ball is in your court to decide whether you would survive during the Viking Age or not. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked the video, check out other historical videos on our channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you don't miss out on such interesting topics.